back to the OT Unleashed Student Takeover series. I'm Katie Peterson, and today we'll be diving into one of the most important components of adaptive gaming, buttons and switches. In our last episode, we talked about the evolution of adaptive controllers, but today we're going to get into more specifics. While adaptive controllers act as a hub, buttons and switches truly make the individual access possible. Today, Eric and I will be discussing the importance of buttons and switches and how we can utilize these components to make gaming more accessible. As always, you can check out more information on the Rehab Arcade. All right, let's just jump right into it. So when people hear buttons and switches, they may think it sounds simple, but in adaptive gaming, this is where customization really happens. To start us off, Eric, can you explain what we mean by buttons and switches in adaptive gaming?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a great question, and honestly, it is exactly what you think it is, but it's also a lot more than that. And just like you said, it's not as easy as just like tapping something, right? So one of the things that we'll talk about in later episodes is doing like a full kind of like how you do an evaluation for, somebody that may need an adaptive gaming setup, right? And part of that evaluation is going to be like what can they use on their body to engage with their game, right? So whether that's like shoulder flexion or internal and external rotation, or maybe using their head on stuff, the important thing is to first know how are they going to engage in the game, and then you could start selecting switches that really complement those movements that they have on their body. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to kind of take you through like a whole exploration of like how different body parts could really integrate and activate buttons and switches throughout, for a video game. So, but it's also like important to understand that, it's not just about every button is the same regarding, sometimes you're going to need a little bit more strength to activate a button. Sometimes buttons are kind of meant to tolerate more rigor, like buttons that are on feet. And sometimes you have very light controlled movement that you're going to need a feather light switch or something really light, so you don't have to use a lot of strength on a button. So there's all kinds of different ways to look at it, and we're going to look at a bunch of different things, different sizes, different ways to mount them. And really, so when we do say buttons and switches, yes, it's as easy as that, but it becomes a lot more complex when you think about how do I activate the button and switch. And so I think that's probably a good place to kind of start us off, and we'll kind of take it from there.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the concept of buttons and switches too, because they come in all different sizes and it really makes that customization to the individual happen. And, we kind of looked at how we could use adaptive controllers to help someone participate in gaming, but really it's those buttons and switches that can really enhance it that much further. And we saw on both the Access and the Xbox adaptive controller, they had input options to add switches and buttons to really make that a better experience for our players.
Yeah, and I mean, you're right. Like, so the controllers that we talked about last week are kind of that hub. It's the brain, right? And if you think about it, that's kind of our central nervous system when it comes to adaptive gaming. And then everything that comes out of it's our peripheral nervous system, right? It's the things that actually do the stuff, right? The controller thinks, the buttons engage. So you think about if you're looking at the anatomy and physiology of gaming, your controller would be that CNS, and then your PNS would be the switches and buttons. So it'd be your hands, it'd be your feet, it would be your eyes, all those things. So if you want to kind of pull it into a medical model, that's kind of what we would look at. So and we talked about this before. I think it's really important to understand your client before you even just like buy a switch. If I have any moms and dads out there or other therapists that are like, okay, I'm just going to build an adaptive gaming setup, or I'm going to buy a bunch of switches. Like, before you do that, understand why you're doing it. Who are you doing this for? Is it for, like, if it's for a clinic and you need a bunch of different options, then buy a bunch of different options. But if it's for an individual, you need to make sure you understand what the individual can do. I mean, there's just a huge amount of complexity when it comes to understanding what the individual can do before buying a switch. I don't want you to spend a bunch of money on something that you don't end up using. It might look really cool, but you might not need it. It might be like super advanced, but it might be too much.
Right.
Like you might need a simple solution rather than the expensive solution. So I think that is a big part of it. So to sum that up, make sure you're looking at what does your client have, what abilities do they have, and then purchase things based off of their abilities, and that's going to be a big part of it. And consider range of motion, strength, coordination, endurance. How long do they need to be able to use it? How many times do they need to be able to tap it? All those things come into play.
Right. It seems like, that client-centered approach and that occupation-based approach is very important when analyzing the ability of a client and making sure that we look at those factors in order for them to be able to engage in gameplay
Yeah.
the way that it's intended to, rather than just trying to buy whatever's the
Yeah.
fanciest, biggest, baddest thing out there. You really want
Yeah.
to understand the client first. That seems like the
Yeah.
basis of everything. Um, but I also, you know, wanted to talk about what is out there. Like what
Yeah.
kind of buttons and switches are you using, and
Yeah.
what kind of things can we look at to make sure that we are making sure that we are keeping the client at the center of our practice?
Yeah, I mean, this is a toughie, right? I'm gonna show you a ton of them on this podcast today, but this scratches the surface of the potential. And the neat thing about this journey of accessibility in gaming for the whole community is that we keep getting more, we keep getting better, we keep finding better solutions, more solutions, and really the more solutions you have, the greater opportunities that you'll have moving forward, with your clients. And so let's take a look. Now, I'm gonna start off with a typical controller, right? So this is your typical controller that most people use, and we've already talked about controllers, so I'm not going to stay on this, but if you look at it, there's a bunch of stuff on here, and I mentioned before, there's typically about 22 inputs, give or take, on a traditional modern controller. So you got to think about, like, how do I replace a lot of that stuff to be able to play a game? First thing you need to know, you don't necessarily need 22 buttons for every game.
Mhm.
If you think about the old Nintendo, like Super Mario, like the original Super Mario Brothers, the controller only had 8 inputs: up, down, left, right, A and B, and then start and select. That was it. And these have 22. So if you think about it, some of the games right now, and if you're an OT trying to start somebody out, or any therapist trying to start somebody out in adaptive gaming, start small. Start something really simple, really easy, so that you can find success early on. And so what I would do is find just one button, all right? One button, one space, and then put them in that button in that space, right? So, for example, so I could replace any button on a thing with this big red button, right? A lot of OTs have seen this. You can use this in a bunch of different ways. This is an AbleNet big red jelly bean button, basically. And this particular button is nice because it is durable. It does have some longevity to it, and it's big. So I can also mount it. If you're watching this episode, there are holes where I could screw it down to something, whether it be a tabletop, or maybe I put it on the side of a wall and somebody's using shoulder abduction or adduction to activate something. Like, it's just a kind of tap on the wall, right? So not only is the switch important, but it's where you position the switch. And we're going to talk all about mounting next week. But for now, thinking about switches and whatnot, like, this is really important. So we have these big, giant, jelly bean switches. AbleNet comes out. They have a lot of different kinds. You can get small ones. You can get ones that you can mount. You can get ones that are huge, mid-size. There's all kinds of different ones that you can get. There's levers, all kinds of stuff. So that's the first kind of basic kind of switch. You can buy these pretty easy. And for the record, all of these will be on our website. They're on our website, so you can just go there if you're not sure and take a look at them. We link where to find them, and a little description of each of them as well. So if you're not sure, if you forget, while you're listening to this, it's on the rehabarcade.com. So the next thing is there's a lot, I was with Warfighter Engage for a long time, nonprofit organization, and we made our own switches. And actually there's a lot of people that are replicating some of the stuff that we made. And so you'll see stuff where it's like, hey, this is a duo switch, right? So this has 2 buttons on it, and it can replace 2 buttons that were on a traditional controller. And which is nice. Like if you just need to jump and sprint, or need to like maybe kick the ball and pass or something like that, you have 2 activation switches that you could be able to do that. Some of the card games, it's like accelerate and brake. You have an acceleration and brake, right? So this would be, again, something great if you just need to isolate that. And you also have to consider, like, is it a physical disability or is it cognition disability? Mm-hmm. And so if there's too many inputs that are available to somebody, it might get very confusing. So the switches, like giving them only 2 options, could be a really great accessibility tool for them, because it eliminates all the other distractions. So you could have 2. There's other things right here. I have a one that we did, and these are 3D printed, and I have links to some other people that do the similar ones. But this one's like a wider scale with 4 buttons on there. So this, if you were playing Xbox, would replace your ABXY, and instead of having it in a tiny little spot like this, you have it in a giant spot like this. So think about if you have an amputee or somebody who has issues maybe with tremors or things like that they can't really activate in those small spaces. This would be a great option for them to do like a wide variety, a bigger cascade of buttons, so they can do more gross motor movements as well. And you'll see some gamers that will want to, like, instead of having that cascade, they'll want to do something that looks like the controller. So maybe even something like this where it is actually in the shape of the ABXY that is on a controller. So it might be more organic. It might feel right playing with something like this, where it's big buttons, but it's in that kind of, rectangle type of shape to be able to replicate what a controller does. So those are a couple options. Another thing's like, so those are your kind of traditional buttons, right? You can get singles, 4 of them. You can get them close together. You can get them wide, and everything. But there's a lot of other body parts that we can use to activate switches. And one of my favorite is a foot switch, right? So this is just something that you would just step on. So if you have an amputee, this is perfect. But if you have somebody that's trying to do adaptive gaming and it's a spinal cord injury, chances are you won't be using a foot pedal. So remember, know your client before you buy a switch, right? Mm. People a lot of times will just buy a bunch of stuff and 90% of it will be useless, right? So this is I love this switch. It's a foot pedal, and it's a great option if you do have control of your feet, or some kind of option there. It's especially good. And whenever I set up people with adaptive gaming, I think about like, what might I use a foot pedal for? Mm-hmm. Jumping. Well, that's great. We jump with our legs. I maybe use a foot pedal for jumping with my feet, right? Or if you're playing a racing game, it makes sense that this would be a gas pedal or something. So make it a gas pedal, and maybe you can do a second one to make it a brake. So that's another option for, adaptive gaming, for using your feet. Some other like human, input factors that we have, like as we have on our bodies, is sip and puff control. So maybe you have a high spinal cord injury and you can use something like this. This is the LipSync, and we will, it is on the Rehab Arcade's website. A link to it. And this is also 3D printed, but the company, I forget who it is, but we'll have it on the link below, but makes this LipSync, and it has some simple controls on it. It has a sip and puff component, so you can blow into it, you can sip into it, and then also it has movement, so you can move your character around, so up, down, left, right. So there's like 6 different types of inputs on like something like this. So you just use it. You would mount it. There's a mount on the bottom, and then you would plug it into your controller using the USB. So options like that. And there's a bunch of other stuff too. Like, really, I think when it comes to buttons and switches, you really, again, when I look at a client, I think about what could I potentially tap into for them to engage in gaming. And sometimes that is a lot of things, and sometimes it's as little as a lot of things that all I'm going to have is like a head and neck. That's going to be tricky, right? So there are some eye gaze things out there that you could potentially use, which is a whole different conversation altogether. But you might consider something like this, right? So I have this on a mount, and we'll talk about mounts next week. But this is just a simple 2 switches, left and right. And you could do something where you even like put it behind somebody's head, and they go left and right. You could put a button behind it and click backwards. I use these on knees a lot, so I'll put it over their knee, and so they can abduct and adduct their knee. You could put it on a shoulder that goes like over the shoulder, so forward and backwards. There are flexion and extension of the shoulder could also activate that switch. So this one's really nice, but it also is all about positioning and mounting to make sure that it's in the right place. Now I will say that with every switch comes a price tag, and I think that that is something worthwhile to talk about. There's 1,000 different kinds, and with all those 1,000 different kinds comes 1,000 different prices. So, I think that that is probably, a good conversation to have about the that part of it as well. So lots of stuff out there for sure, and a lot of good commercially available things, but a lot of things that OTs are making, OTs are building, or not just OTs, but engineers, other people that are, savvy in the business of switches and buttons. So
yeah,
a lot of cool stuff.
It's super awesome to see how you can put different buttons and switches and use different buttons and switches for each of those different buttons and switches serves a different motor profile, whether that be using your neck and your head to activate it, or your shoulder, like you said, or your knee or your foot. And for those that are just listening in, all of these switches look vastly different as well. Like the foot pedal, you can tell is like a little bit more durable rather than, just one of the 3D printed buttons that might not, be perfectly suitable for someone to kick it every single time. So each of these serves a different purpose and are allowing players to activate the game and jump and drive and do all those actions.
And I mean that's a good point, and we didn't describe each of these things. I do encourage you, if you have an opportunity, you're just listening in today, pop over on that segment, and actually what we'll do is we'll link the specific timestamp on that so that you can just watch that segment to see the switches that we did in the show notes below. But it's also worthwhile, going back to kind of how expensive these things are. Switches have traditionally been pretty expensive, and that's a barrier for a lot of people with disabilities or families who have gamers with disabilities or whatnot. So I do want to kind of point out that there is some, there's some barriers out there, but I do one last bit of switch, I guess a kit of switches I'd like to also share is Logitech came out with a understanding that switches are expensive. Logitech came out with a whole kit of switches for adaptive gaming, and full transparency, OT also worked on this. I had an opportunity to give my feedback of what they were doing and whatnot with these, but they have a whole kit that's $100, and this is a steal when it comes to that. And if you look at it, you can kind of pull this stuff out, and I'll show you kind of as we go. It comes with a mat that you can mount the switches to. You can use Velcro. You can use different types of ways to mount it and put it on somebody's lap or whatever. But the switches themselves are beautiful. They come with all kinds of different buttons and levers, and I'm trying to pull a couple out for you guys so you can kind of see them. Oh, there you go. All right, so like this one would be really cool, like one that you could literally mount down, and it's kind of more of a lever system switch. And so if you're listening to this, it's a black switch that kind of comes down, almost looks like a little small mini stapler for a switch there. There's some that are just mid-size. There's some that are tiny. There's different caps. There's Velcro. Let me show you. There's some little feather light ones in here that are tiny. Like this is a great example of one. Like this smaller switch is a feather light switch. And if you're looking at this, it's a really small switch, and it takes very little to activate it. Which again, if you have somebody with a small amount of movement, this is just going to take just a couple millimeters of movement to be able to activate that switch. And so this is a great one, and it's included in that switch in that package itself. And so they have a lot of different things. Also, one of the things that I like too that I want to show is that what comes with the kit too is you can label all your buttons and switches. And so
cool.
What I'm holding up right now is a bunch of stickers and labels for all these different types of buttons that are to put on the top of the buttons for the Logitech. And there's black and white, there's colors. And so if you think about high contrast, low contrast, all these would be great to be able to identify the buttons and switches that you're using, with your setup. And so I really like the Logitech kit. It's so well worth the money, and definitely something that I think that if you're going to buy blindly without knowing the client, this would be a great start, is to buy that Logitech kit.
That is such an awesome new product that's coming out, like because of how many options that you have. Because I do feel like, in clinical practice, trying to figure out what a client needs is definitely a trial and error type of situation.
100%.
And to have those options to be able to trial without having to spend a bunch of money on just a single button is much better than
Yeah, I mean, I've seen buttons go for $70, $80, $90
Right.
for a single button, so like having an entire kit of buttons for $100, that is a steal for sure.
It's definitely a great option for therapists to trial for each of their clients, which I think is awesome.
Yeah.
And it also, it's not always solved in just one session, trying to figure out what is going to be able to make the game work for that client. Like you're going to have to, keep doing things over and over again. And, sometimes clients have fatigue too, and their endurance, they might not be able to hit that switch multiple times. So you have to keep that in mind as well. Could you talk about like how we could, maybe implement some things to reduce that barrier?
Yeah, endurance is a big deal, especially, I mean, if you think about high spinal cord injury, especially, and you're thinking like, okay, you have so limited movement and function, and it's maybe isolated to just the head and neck. If you fatigue your head and neck, that could potentially compromise your independence for the rest of the day, and so I do definitely think that is a great conversation to have with your client. And it's not something I can say every client will be like this or every client will be like that. But as you're going through that process of trial and error, as you're looking at, what's going to work, what's not going to work, it's 100%, you have to be able to consider, what does it look like for this particular person? Is it going to over fatigue them? Am I going to compromise other potential independence in their day? Or maybe it's something that the more I play, the more endurance I have. Maybe I can even use it for a therapeutic type of thing. Maybe I'm actually strengthening. Maybe I'm gaining range of motion. So it's possible to even use it in a therapeutic way, So endurance is tough. Fatigue is tough. But I think that if you are kind of working with somebody that, start them out at a kind of a low expectations, put a timer on it, maybe give them like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, let's see how this works. I want you to maybe have a game that has less load, and then like we do a lot of times, we'll grade the activity based off of the results that we get, the outcomes that we get from those sessions. And then there might be just a happy medium, like, hey, look, you're tapped out. If you played 6 hours a day and now like you can't do the rest, you can't even eat because you can't hold your head up, that's a problem. So maybe we advise them like, okay, you need to decrease the gaming, and we're going to look at maybe doing 3 hours a day instead of 6 hours a day or something
Yeah.
like that. But you're right. Fatigue is so overlooked. I definitely think it's something that you need to make sure that you address and that the client is aware of, especially if they're going home and they're kind of unsupervised in their gaming stuff, because it could just get like all day long.
Right. I mean, even when it is not just gaming, like I've had patients and clients that I've helped treat, and I'm like, okay, here's your home exercise program. And they think
Yeah.
doing multiple reps and sets is going to make them better. Or if
Yeah.
they're engaging in something that they really want to do, such as gaming, like gamers
Yeah.
can play all day long, like you're saying.
Yeah.
So you want
Yeah.
to make sure that you're not impacting the rest of the day, like you said, but also
Yeah.
giving them, that equipment that's not just equipment, it's a participation tool as well. It's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
letting them do what they having that autonomy to do what they want
Yeah.
to do,
Yeah.
but without impacting the rest of the day. So that is a great point to make
Yeah.
sure that you're looking at the big picture rather than just that one session that you're doing with them.
Yeah.
Um,
And I will say, just, before we kind of move on, there are also options where you can set up a switch to continually fire. So instead of having to push it over and over again, so let's think of like your button masher type games where you just like click,
mhm.
click, 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 click. There are, options where you can just click a switch, and as soon as you activate it and hold it down, it's just firing, constantly. And so that is another way to like decrease that fatigue situation. Like, also like if I have a control in a game that requires me to hit the button a lot of times, and then I have other controls in a game that is only every once in a while, make sure that you put the controls in the right place for the person. So like if I have a head switch and an arm switch, I'm much better. I'm in a much better place to make sure that the arm switch is the one that I used often
Mhm.
versus the head switch. So maybe maybe I'm playing Call of Duty. I need to switch my weapon out. Well, I can do that with a head switch because I only do that maybe once every couple minutes. Whereas if I'm firing my weapon, I have to do that maybe often, and so I
Right.
need to do it more. So again, if you have multiple areas where you can activate a switch, make sure that you find, what's best suited. Just because you can activate something doesn't mean it's the right place to activate it.
Right. And that goes back to like really having that conversation with the client and looking at what
Yeah.
game they're trying to play and
Yeah.
and those features and actions within the game.
Yeah.
So that's definitely an important component when you're trying to trial and error the different switches because you have to
Yeah.
look at all those components and
Yeah.
features and have those like big OT thoughts in the back of your head.
Yeah.
How many times
Yeah.
are you going to be hitting this button and how many
Yeah.
times are we going to be hitting a different action and vice versa?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that is a
Yeah,
really,
it's like
really
an
important.
activity analysis, like,
Yes.
in itself. So all my students out there that are listening and you're like, I'll never use activity analysis. Well, I got another story for you. So,
Absolutely. I mean,
yeah,
just the whole picture is really what you have to look at. It's
yeah,
not just one component, it's every single factor that your client can do and really
yeah.
looking at what they want to do and how we can make that happen. Um, but as technology continues to evolve, what changes do you see for buttons and switches?
Yeah. Well, and this is something that it has increased so rapidly that we have seen differences in buttons and switches. And I think that one of the things that I have noticed is that people are looking at ways to engage with a game that we hadn't ever before.
Right.
I worked on with a client. Well, I worked with a group of makers with a client who had very little control over, the just different elements of her body, but she could like smile and intentionally activate her like eyebrows and
Hmm.
stuff. And so we actually did a cheek switch. And so
Oh,
when she
that's so
smiled,
cool.
it would detect the contraction in the cheek in the
Wow.
muscle, and then it would activate something. And you could do the same thing with your eyebrows. And so those are cases that are very individual, very custom. But what we're looking at is how can I really adopt anything that the human body can produce
Hmm.
in a consistent way. So I have to be able to replicate that pattern. And then how can I potentially use that, over and over again? And how do I make that technology easy? Like, do I need to program something?
Hmm.
Because at the end of the day, one of the big tricks here is that the gamer themselves may actually be so well adept at technology and understanding it, but their physical body can't put it in place for it to work. And so with that, somebody else is going to have to set it up. And, so like, for example, if we look at, a kid who, and I just had a child like this who, dove into the water, got a spinal cord injury because he hit his head on the bottom of the pool, and now he's got a spinal cord injury. Teenager who loves video games.
Right.
How does he set up his system? Well, his mom might have to do it. And
Hmm.
so mom, who has no idea about video games, who doesn't care about video games, is now has to figure out how to do these things. So the future, what I see is more options and also easier to set up. The Xbox Adaptive Controller was really ahead of its time because what it did was take all of the hard work out of it and said, I am going to make this so easy for you that all you have to do is buy a button and it'll work. It just will work.
Hmm.
And so I think that as we continue to go in the future, there'll be more options. There'll be a lot more attention to it. There's a lot of makers out there that are able to make them on their own. The fact that we could 3D print our own switches is
Yeah,
incredible.
that
Even in
is.
OT schools, a lot of people are learning how to make a switch themselves.
Hmm.
It's really, I think the future is going to be, it would be cool. Just like as we have a lot of clinics getting these 3D printers, like you could just say, you know what, I'll tell you what, I actually can make you a switch for 50 cents a product,
Right.
and then you can take it home with you. Like that's incredible. It's cheaper than making a splint for them.
Yeah.
So I think that's the future. I think the future is it's going to get cheaper, it's going to be easier, and there'll be more options.
Yeah. I hope that we can really remove some of those barriers that prevent patients from having not being able to access the
Yeah,
buttons and switches. And I
yeah,
think exactly what you're saying, limiting the cost, maybe being more customizable for like, different features and more
yeah,
specific features that a client is capable to do. And
yeah.
really that greater collaboration between clinicians and manufacturers, maybe.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
agreed. Yeah, and it's cool. I mean, there's a lot of really cool tech, and actually, a shameless plug. I really encourage people to kind of follow the GA conference. It's the Game Accessibility Conference. They have a website, but they also have a biannual gaming conference that if you're ever interested in this stuff, they're gonna show you, they're gonna release, they're going to tell you about what the latest in accessibility and tech is. And they even have a game accessibility awards. And last year, one of these hardware pieces called the BioWave Proteus was the winner of the hardware, and it is a modular system that you can really customize it to your own thing. I don't have a one with me to show
I'll,
you,
I'll put
but
in
it
another
was.
picture. I put a picture in our adaptive controller
Oh yeah, perfect. Yeah,
conversation. It is so cool how you can
yeah,
customize it to like, I mean, you could
yeah,
put something here and something down here. I'll put some
yeah,
pictures in, but it is a really
perfect.
cool, innovative way to
Yeah,
create accessible gaming.
yeah. I mean, if you can buy a product that you can manipulate to somebody's customs, uh, life experience, then ultimately you're going to be able to sell a lot more product because it's not just a single use type thing. If I have a sip and puff control, I'm probably not going to get a lot of lower extremity amputees that buy that,
Right.
or even upper extremity amputees, maybe. But if I have a product that amputees can use, people that are spinal cord injuries can use, then honestly, like it's a better product to buy because you can use it in a bunch of different ways.
Hmm.
So anyway, there are a lot of options out there, and I love that we are having the conversations about them, that people want to know more and people want to
Hmm.
help more.
Yeah,
For
it's
sure.
awesome to be able to kind of spread that knowledge and to provide viewers, listeners, gamers with that
Yeah.
information that could help just one client. That's the goal.
Yeah.
It's just
That's
to
the goal.
keep spreading awareness. But
Yeah.
thank you so much for kind of talking about all the buttons and switches and what's
Yeah.
out there and our hopes for the future. It's been
Yeah.
very exciting conversation.
Yeah.
But
Thank you. Well, thanks again for having me and taking over. It's been such a fun ride so far to kind of go through all these little categories.
absolutely. And we have so much left in store in the next couple episodes. We'll be looking at, mounts and splinting for gamings in the next
Yeah.
episode. And then we have a bunch of stuff about evaluation, looking at the first step of how we can get started in gaming.
Yeah.
And then a lot of really great, exciting things to come as well. But
Yeah.
thanks
Cool.
everybody for tuning in again, and we will see you next time on OT Unleashed Student Takeover.
All right. Bye, guys.